Richard Langley was a man who seemed to have it all. By the age of 35, he had built an empire from scratch, turning his small startup into a multi-million-dollar company that everyone talked about. His name was on billboards, in newspapers, and at the top of Forbes lists. But behind the polished suits and dazzling smile lay a man who felt more alone than ever. Richard's life wasn't just about business. There was another chapter, a quieter one, that he tried hard to forget. Years ago, before the fame and fortune took over, Richard had been happily married to Emma. She was nothing like him, gentle where he was bold, patient where he was restless, and deeply rooted in values that emphasized family and love. Emma believed in building a life together, one filled with laughter, shared dreams, and stability. For a while, Richard shared her vision. They were a perfect team. She kept him grounded, and he inspired her to dream bigger. But as Richard's career skyrocketed, cracks began to form in their marriage. Emma noticed the change first. Richard stopped coming home for dinner. He missed birthdays, anniversaries, and even weekend plans they'd made months in advance. When he did show up, his mind was elsewhere, always thinking about deals, meetings, or the next big opportunity. Emma tried everything to bring him back. She cooked his favorite meals, left sweet notes in his briefcase, and even joined him on business trips, hoping to remind him of what truly mattered. But no matter how hard she tried, Richard slipped further away. The argument started small but grew louder with each passing month. "You're married to your work, not to me," Emma would say, tears streaming down her face. Richard would defend himself, claiming that everything he did was for their future. "I'm doing this for us, Emma." He'd insist, though deep down, he knew it wasn't entirely true. The truth was, Richard loved the thrill of success, the adrenaline rush of closing a deal, the admiration of his peers, and the power that came with wealth. Slowly but surely, those things became his priority. One evening, after yet another fight, Richard stood at the doorway of their apartment, suitcase in hand. Emma begged him to stay, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please, Richard, we can fix this. Just slow down. Be here with me." But Richard shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I need space," he muttered, avoiding her tearful eyes. And with that, he walked out, leaving behind not just Emma, but also the life they had built together. For weeks after, Richard told himself he'd made the right choice. He threw himself into his work, convincing himself that freedom was what he needed. Yet, late at night, when the city lights dimmed and the world fell silent, doubt crept in. He wondered if he'd done the right thing. Occasionally, he thought about calling Emma, but pride always stopped him. Instead, he buried himself deeper into his career, determined to prove, to himself, if no one else, that he didn't need anyone. Little did Richard know, his decision to leave would set off a chain of events that would haunt him for years to come. At the time, he couldn't have imagined how far-reaching the consequences of his actions would be, or how much they would force him to confront the parts of himself he'd been running from. Life without Emma was different, emptier. But Richard refused to admit it. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. His company continued to grow, expanding into new markets and earning him even more recognition. He bought a sleek penthouse in the heart of the city, filled it with modern furniture, and hosted glamorous parties where influential people mingled under crystal chandeliers. To the outside world, Richard Langley was unstoppable, a man who had conquered both his industry and his personal life. But behind closed doors, things were far from ideal. Richard's days blurred together in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and business trips. He traveled constantly, hopping from one country to another, always chasing the next big opportunity. At first, the excitement kept him going. The thrill of signing a lucrative deal or launching a groundbreaking project was intoxicating. But over time, the shine began to wear off. The victories felt hollow, the applause meaningless. No matter how many accolades he received or how much money he made, there was something missing, a void that no amount of success could fill. Loneliness crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching across an empty room. Richard tried to ignore it at first, distracting himself with work or social events. He surrounded himself with friends, or at least people who claimed to be friends, but none of them truly understood him. Conversations revolved around business deals, investments, and gossip about mutual acquaintances. There was no depth, no real connection. And while Richard had always prided himself on being independent, he couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was absent from his life. Late at night, when the noise of the city faded and the silence pressed in, Richard's thoughts inevitably drifted back to Emma. He wondered what she was doing, whether she had moved on, if she ever thought about him. Occasionally, guilt would rise in his chest, sharp and unrelenting. He remembered the way she used to smile at him, her eyes lighting up whenever he walked through the door. He thought about the arguments they'd had, the tears she'd shed, and the desperate plea she'd made the night he left. "Be here with me," she had said. Those words haunted him now, echoing in his mind like a forgotten melody. To distract himself, Richard threw himself into hobbies he'd never had time for before. He took up golf, joined an exclusive club, and started collecting rare wines. He dated occasionally, though none of the relationships lasted long. The women he met were beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious, but none of them made him feel the way Emma once had. They didn't ground him or challenge him the way she did. Instead, they seemed more like trophies to add to his collection, symbols of his success rather than genuine companions. Despite his best efforts to move on, memories of Emma lingered. Sometimes, when he passed a couple walking hand in hand or saw a family enjoying dinner together, a pang of longing would strike him. He imagined what his life might have been like if he'd stayed, if he'd chosen love over ambition. Would he and Emma still be happy? Would they have kids by now, running around the house and filling it with laughter? These thoughts unsettled him, forcing him to confront the choices he'd made. But Richard wasn't ready to face the truth yet. Instead, he convinced himself that he was better off alone, that happiness came from achieving goals and accumulating wealth. He told himself he didn't need anyone, that independence was freedom. Yet, deep down, he knew it wasn't true. Beneath the polished exterior and the carefully curated lifestyle, Richard was a man searching for something he couldn't quite name. He didn't realize it then, but the answers he sought weren't in boardrooms or bank accounts. They were waiting for him in the past he'd left behind, and in the future he hadn't yet discovered. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Richard found himself at a charity gala in a small town about 2 hours outside the city. The event wasn't his usual scene. No high-profile executives or million-dollar deals to be made, but his assistant had insisted it would be good for his public image. So, dressed in a tailored suit and armed with a polite smile, Richard mingled among the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with strangers. He didn't expect anything memorable to happen that day, but fate had other plans. As he wandered through the outdoor garden, where the event was held, Richard's attention was drawn to a group of children playing near a fountain. At first glance, they seemed like any other kids, laughing, chasing each other, and completely oblivious to the adults around them. But something about them caught his eye. They were quadruplets, identical down to their matching outfits, and there was an uncanny familiarity in their features that made him pause. Their bright blue eyes sparkled under the sunlight, and their smiles carried a warmth that felt strangely comforting. Richard froze mid-step, his heart skipping a beat. He couldn't look away. Those eyes, they were his eyes. The shape of their faces, the way their hair fell slightly tousled, even the confident way they moved. It all reminded him of himself as a child. His mind raced with questions. Who were these kids? How could they look so much like him? Was it possible? No, he shook his head, dismissing the thought almost immediately. It was too far-fetched, too impossible. Yet the resemblance was undeniable, and the longer he stared, the more unsettled he became. Summoning his courage, Richard approached them cautiously. "Hi there," he said, kneeling down to their level. His voice came out softer than he intended, tinged with nervousness. The children stopped playing and turned to look at him, their curious expressions mirroring one another perfectly. "Who are you?" one of them asked boldly, tilting her head to the side. She had a mischievous glint in her eye, and Richard felt a pang of recognition. He used to have that same spark as a kid. "I'm Richard," he replied with a hesitant smile. "And who might you four be?" The children introduced themselves enthusiastically. Noah, Lily, Ava, and Max. Each name rolled off their tongues like music, filling the air with energy and innocence. They told him they were siblings, born on the same day, and proud of it. Richard listened intently, trying to keep his composure while his mind swirled with possibilities. When he asked who their parents were, they pointed toward a woman standing nearby, chatting with other guests. Her name, they said, was Sarah Bennett, and she was their mom. Richard's stomach tightened as he glanced at Sarah. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a warm demeanor. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, but the connection between her and the children was unmistakable. Still, the resemblance between the Quadruplets and Richard gnawed at him. It wasn't just coincidence. It couldn't be. As the children returned to their game, Richard stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. For the rest of the evening, Richard couldn't focus on anything else. He tried to push the encounter to the back of his mind, telling himself it was just a strange twist of fate. But no matter how hard he tried, the image of those four smiling faces lingered, refusing to let him go. Something deep inside told him this meeting wasn't random, and that uncovering the truth would change his life forever. The encounter with the Quadruplets left Richard restless. For days, their faces haunted him. Those piercing blue eyes, so eerily similar to his own, and their laughter, which echoed in his mind like a song he couldn't forget. He tried to dismiss it as mere coincidence, but the nagging feeling that something deeper was at play wouldn't leave him alone. It wasn't just curiosity. It was an unshakable sense of connection, as if fate had placed them in his path for a reason. Determined to get answers, Richard decided to dig deeper. Under the guise of philanthropy, he arranged another meeting with Sarah Bennett, the children's mother. A week later, he found himself sitting across from her in a cozy cafe on the outskirts of town. Sarah was polite but reserved, her smile warm yet guarded. She thanked him for his interest in supporting local schools, but Richard could tell she was wary of his intentions. After exchanging pleasantries about the charity gala, he steered the conversation toward the topic weighing heavily on his mind. "Your kids are amazing," Richard began, choosing his words carefully. "They're so full of energy and personality. Do they take after their dad?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to her coffee cup. The question seemed to catch her off guard, and for a moment, silence hung between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. "Their father isn't part of their lives," she said simply. "I've raised them on my own." Richard nodded, pretending to understand, though his pulse quickened. "That must have been tough," he said gently. "Being a single parent is no small feat." "It wasn't easy," Sarah admitted, her tone softening. "But we made it work. They're happy, healthy, and thriving. That's what matters most." Though her response gave little away, Richard sensed there was more to the story. He wanted to press further, to ask directly if he might somehow be connected to the children, but he knew better than to blurt out such a loaded question. Instead, he bided his time, steering the conversation toward lighter topics while subtly gathering information. As they talked, he noticed old photographs displayed on the walls of the cafe, one of which caught his eye immediately. It showed Sarah standing beside Emma, the two women smiling brightly at the camera. Richard's heart skipped a beat. "Is that Emma?" he asked casually, pointing to the photo. His voice betrayed none of the shock coursing through him. Sarah glanced at the picture and smiled fondly. "Yes, that's Emma. We go way back. She's one of my closest friends." The revelation hit Richard like a thunderbolt. Emma, friends with Sarah. The pieces began falling into place, forming a puzzle he hadn't anticipated. If Sarah and Emma were close, then surely Emma would have known about the quadruplets, and possibly even their father. The thought sent a chill down Richard's spine. Could it really be possible? Had Emma kept this secret from him all these years? Unable to contain his suspicions any longer, Richard decided to confront Sarah directly, but delicately. "I don't mean to pry," he said, leaning forward slightly, "but I can't help noticing how much your kids resemble, well, me." He let the words hang in the air, watching her reaction closely. Sarah stiffened, her eyes widening ever so slightly. For a brief moment, panic flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "That's quite a coincidence," she replied, her voice tinged with unease. "It doesn't feel like a coincidence to me," Richard pressed, his tone gentle but firm. "Sarah, I need to know the truth. Are those children mine?" The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping in resignation. "Emma didn't want you to know," she confessed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "She gave birth to them not long after you left. She suspected you might be their father, but she chose not to tell you. She didn't think you'd want anything to do with them, or her." The weight of her words crashed over Richard like a tidal wave. He sat there stunned, his mind reeling with emotions, shock, guilt, disbelief, and a strange sense of awe. All this time, he had 4 children out in the world, living without him, growing up without knowing him. And Emma, the woman he once loved, had carried that burden alone, raising their kids by herself, while he built his empire. As Sarah continued speaking, explaining how Emma had moved on and remarried, Richard felt a mix of admiration and sorrow. Admiration for Emma's strength and resilience, and sorrow for the life he had unknowingly abandoned. He realized then that the truth wasn't just about him. It was about the family he never knew existed, and the second chance he might still have to make things right. The revelation of the quadruplets' existence left Richard reeling, but it also ignited a fire within him, a desperate need to make amends. For years, he had lived with the weight of regret for leaving Emma, but now that guilt felt sharper, more tangible. These weren't just abstract mistakes from his past. They were real children, his children, who had grown up without him. The thought consumed him day and night, pushing him to act. But as much as he wanted to rush into their lives and claim his place as their father, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Richard's first step was reaching out to Emma. He called her repeatedly, sent heartfelt messages, and even showed up at her doorstep unannounced. Each attempt ended in rejection. Emma refused to see him, her pain and anger still raw after all these years. Through intermediaries, a mutual friend and Sarah, Richard learned that Emma had moved on, remarried, and found happiness with someone who cherished both her and the quadruplets. She had built a stable, loving life for herself and the kids, and she wasn't about to let Richard disrupt it. Despite Emma's resistance, she eventually agreed to allow limited contact between Richard and the quadruplets, but only under strict conditions. Their meetings would take place in neutral settings, always supervised by Emma or another trusted adult. Richard understood her caution. After everything he had done, or rather, hadn't done, it made sense that she wouldn't trust him easily. Still, the restrictions stung. Every interaction felt like walking on eggshells, every word weighed down by the history he couldn't undo. During those early visits, Richard struggled to connect with the children. They were polite but distant, clearly unsure of how to feel about this stranger claiming to be their father. "Why didn't you come before?" Lily asked one afternoon during a park outing, her voice tinged with both curiosity and accusation. Richard's heart sank. He didn't have an answer that could justify his absence, so he settled for honesty. "I made a lot of mistakes," he admitted, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "I wasn't there when I should have been, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I want to get to know you, all of you." His words seemed to soften them slightly, though skepticism lingered in their expressions. Over time, however, small breakthroughs began to happen. Noah challenged him to a game of soccer, testing his skills and laughing when Richard tripped over the ball. Ava shyly asked him to help solve a tricky math problem, her face lighting up when he figured it out together with her. Max proudly showed off his collection of toy cars, explaining each model in meticulous detail. And Lily, ever the bold one, demanded stories about his travels, peppering him with endless questions. These moments, though fleeting, gave Richard hope. He saw glimpses of himself in their personalities, their curiosity, determination, and zest for life, and it filled him with pride. Yet, no matter how much progress he made with the children, the shadow of Emma's distrust loomed large. During drop-offs and pickups, she remained cold and formal, her eyes guarded whenever their paths crossed. It was clear she wasn't ready to forgive him, or perhaps never would. One evening, after a particularly strained exchange with Emma, Richard found himself sitting alone in his car, staring at the steering wheel. Frustration bubbled inside him. Why couldn't she see that he was trying? Didn't she understand how much he regretted leaving? But then, as if a switch flipped in his mind, he realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't owed to him. He had burned bridges, abandoned the people who needed him most, and now he had to earn back their trust, not demand it. That realization changed everything. Instead of focusing on what Emma wouldn't give him, Richard shifted his energy toward proving himself through actions. He started attending school events, cheering loudly from the sidelines during basketball games, and clapping enthusiastically at piano recitals. He helped the kids with homework, taught them how to ride bikes better, and even baked cookies with them, though his attempts often ended in burnt disasters. Slowly but surely, the quadruplets began to warm up to him, sensing his genuine effort to be part of their world. But while Richard celebrated these victories, he couldn't ignore the walls Emma still kept firmly in place. Her reluctance served as a constant reminder of the damage he had caused, not just to her, but to their entire family. Redemption, he realized, wasn't going to come easily. It would require patience, humility, and a willingness to face the consequences of his choices head-on. And though the road ahead promised challenges, Richard knew one thing for certain. He was done running from his past. This time, he was staying, for good. As weeks turned into months, Richard's bond with the quadruplets grew stronger. Each visit became less awkward and more natural, transforming from strained encounters into moments filled with laughter, curiosity, and shared experiences. The children began to open up to him in ways they hadn't before, revealing their unique personalities and quirks. Noah loved sports and always challenged Richard to races or impromptu basketball games. Lily was fiercely creative, often dragging him into her imaginative world of storytelling and art projects. Ava had a knack for problem-solving, eagerly seeking his help with puzzles or tricky school assignments. And Max, the quietest of the bunch, surprised Richard with his deep knowledge of dinosaurs and space, sparking conversations that lasted hours. Richard threw himself into these moments wholeheartedly, determined to make up for lost time. He scaled back his work commitments, delegating tasks to trusted employees so he could prioritize being present in the quadruplets' lives. For the first time in years, he found joy in simple things, reading bedtime stories, helping them build forts out of blankets, or teaching them how to bake cookies, though the kitchen usually ended up a mess. These small acts of connection brought him immense satisfaction, far outweighing any business deal or financial success he'd achieved in the past. But balancing his newfound role as a father with his demanding career wasn't easy. There were days when urgent calls interrupted family outings, and late-night meetings forced him to cancel plans. At first, the quadruplets didn't understand why work stuff kept pulling him away. "You're always busy," Lily said one evening after he missed their movie night. Her words cut deeper than she intended, reminding Richard of the very mistakes he was trying to leave behind. Determined not to repeat history, he made a conscious effort to draw clearer boundaries between his professional and personal life. Slowly, the kids began to trust that he would show up, not just physically, but emotionally too. Emma, however, remained cautious. While she allowed Richard more freedom in spending time with the children, her guard was still firmly up. She watched him closely during their interactions, ensuring he didn't overstep or disrupt the stability she had worked so hard to create. Her skepticism frustrated Richard at times, but he understood where it came from. Trust, he realized, wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It had to be earned through consistent actions over time. One afternoon, while helping Ava with a science project, Richard noticed Emma standing nearby, observing quietly. When their eyes met, there was a flicker of something in her expression, perhaps acknowledgement of the effort he was putting in. It wasn't gratitude or forgiveness, but it was progress. That evening, after the kids went to bed, Emma approached him hesitantly. "I see you're trying," she said, her voice measured. "And I appreciate that, for their sake. But don't think this means we're okay, Richard. What you did, it changed everything." Her words stung, but they also grounded him. Emma wasn't ready to let go of the pain he had caused, and he couldn't blame her. Instead of defending himself, he nodded solemnly. "I know I can't undo the past, Emma, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever it takes to prove that to you, to all of you, I'll do it." Over time, Richard's persistence began to chip away at Emma's walls ever so slightly. She started allowing him to attend major milestones, like parent-teacher conferences and school plays. Occasionally, she even joined in on activities with the kids, creating rare but meaningful moments where the five of them felt like a makeshift family unit. Though Emma never softened completely, her guardedness gave way to a grudging acceptance. She recognized that Richard was genuinely committed to being part of the Quadruplets' lives, and that for now was enough. For Richard, these incremental changes felt monumental. He knew he still had a long way to go, but each step forward reinforced his resolve. He was no longer the man who walked out on his responsibilities. He was someone striving to be better, not just for himself, but for the children who deserved a father and the woman who deserved peace. Redemption wasn't easy, but every smile from the Quadruplets reminded him why it was worth fighting for. As the months passed, Richard's relationship with the Quadruplets continued to deepen. They no longer saw him as a distant stranger, but as someone who genuinely cared about them, someone they could count on. Yet, despite his progress with the children, Richard couldn't ignore the lingering tension between him and Emma. He knew that true reconciliation with the kids would never be complete without addressing the unresolved emotions between them. One evening, after dropping the Quadruplets off at home, Richard decided it was time to have the conversation he'd been avoiding. A raw, honest talk with Emma. "Can we sit for a moment?" he asked hesitantly as she stood in the doorway, ready to close the door behind him. His tone was soft, almost pleading. Emma hesitated, studying his face for a long moment before stepping aside and gesturing for him to come in. The living room was warm and inviting, filled with photos of the children and mementos from their lives together. Richard felt a pang of guilt looking at those pictures, reminders of moments he had missed. "I owe you an apology," Richard began, his voice trembling slightly. "Not just for leaving all those years ago, but for everything that came after. The pain I caused, the trust I broke, the life I walked away from. I know words can't fix what I did, but I need you to hear me out." Emma crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing, letting his words hang in the air. Then, finally, she spoke. "Do you even realize how hard it was for me? How alone I felt raising 4 babies by myself? I didn't sleep for months, Richard. I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd made some kind of mistake, if I wasn't good enough to keep you around." Her voice cracked, and Richard felt his chest tighten. This was the side of Emma he had never allowed himself to see, the vulnerability she had hidden behind her strength. "You were always enough, Emma," he said earnestly. "The problem was me. I was selfish, blind to what really mattered. I thought success would fill the emptiness inside me, But it only made it worse. Every night, I wondered what might have been if I'd stayed, if I'd chosen us instead of chasing something hollow. Emma wiped a tear from her cheek, her defenses beginning to crumble. It wasn't just about you leaving, she admitted. It was about the silence afterward. No calls, no letters, nothing. You erased yourself completely. And when I found out I was pregnant, with quadruplets, I didn't know what to do. I thought about telling you, but then I realized you wouldn't want this life. So I raised them alone, hoping one day they'd understand why their dad wasn't there. Richard swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket. I don't expect you to forgive me, Emma, he said quietly. But I hope someday you'll believe that I'm trying to be better. For them, for you, for myself. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I lost, but I know I'll never fully deserve it. For the first time in years, Emma looked at him not with anger or resentment, but with something resembling understanding. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. Redemption isn't earned overnight, Richard. It's about showing up, staying consistent, and proving that your actions match your words. If you're serious about being part of their lives, you need to prove it, not just to me, but to them. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. While Emma still carried scars from the past, she acknowledged that Richard was different now, or at least trying to be. Over the following weeks, their interactions grew less strained. She began including him in more aspects of the quadruplets' lives, allowing him to attend birthdays, school events, and family dinners. Though their dynamic remained complicated, there was a newfound sense of cooperation, a fragile partnership built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to the children's well-being. For Richard, these changes meant everything. He realized that forgiveness wasn't something he could demand. It was something he had to earn through patience, humility, and unwavering dedication. As he lay awake at night reflecting on his journey, he understood that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, growing stronger because of it, and becoming the person his children needed him to be. Years passed, and Richard's transformation from a distant, self-centered man to a devoted father was nothing short of remarkable. The quadruplets, Noah, Lily, Ava, and Max, had grown into bright, confident children who adored their dad. To them, he wasn't just the man who showed up late. He was the one who cheered loudest at their soccer games, helped them build science fair projects at midnight, and told silly bedtime stories that left them giggling until they fell asleep. Richard had learned to cherish these moments, realizing that true wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in the love and laughter shared with his family. Emma, too, noticed the change in him. While she would never fully erase the pain of his departure, she came to trust that Richard was committed to being present, not just for the kids, but for her as well. Their relationship remained complicated, but it evolved into something grounded in mutual respect. They became co-parents in the truest sense, working together to ensure the quadruplets felt loved and supported. Though Emma's heart still belonged to the man she remarried, their stepfather Daniel, she acknowledged that Richard had earned his place back in their lives. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Richard also made significant changes in his professional life. He stepped down as CEO of his company, handing over the reins to younger executives while keeping a small advisory role. This decision freed up time for him to focus on what truly mattered: his children. He moved closer to Emma and the kids, buying a modest home just a few blocks away. On weekends, he took them camping, fishing, or hiking, creating memories that none of them would ever forget. His days of jet-setting across the globe were replaced by simpler joys: baking cookies with Lily, teaching Noah how to throw a curveball, helping Ava solve math problems, and listening intently as Max explained the mysteries of black holes. The quadruplets, now teenagers, often joked about how different their dad was from the workaholic businessman Sarah had described when they first met him. "You're such a dork now," Lily teased one evening as Richard attempted to rap along to their favorite song. He laughed, unbothered by the jab. Being called a dork was a small price to pay for the connection he'd built with them. But Richard's journey wasn't without challenges. Balancing his past mistakes with his desire to be a better father required constant effort. There were moments when old habits threatened to resurface, times when work emergencies tempted him to cancel plans, or when frustration got the better of him during tough parenting moments. Yet each time, he reminded himself why he had chosen this path. He thought about the years he had lost, the tears Emma had shed, and the faces of his children when he first walked back into their lives. Those memories kept him grounded, pushing him to keep moving forward. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Richard found himself sitting on the porch with Emma. The Quadruplets were inside, laughing and playing board games, their voices echoing through the open windows. For a moment, neither of them spoke, content to simply listen to the sounds of happiness filling the air. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "You've come a long way, Richard," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the fading light. "I didn't think you'd stick around, but you proved me wrong." Her words caught him off guard, and he turned to look at her. "Thank you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." As they sat there together, Richard realized something profound. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past or undoing mistakes. It was about learning, growing, and finding a way to move forward. He hadn't been given a second chance lightly. He had earned it through years of hard work, humility, and sacrifice. And though his journey was far from perfect, it had led him to where he belonged, with his children, surrounded by love and purpose. In the end, Richard discovered that success wasn't measured by accolades or wealth, but by the lives he touched and the connections he nurtured. The Quadruplets weren't just his biological children. They were his greatest achievement, a testament to the power of perseverance and love. As he watched them grow into kind, intelligent, and compassionate individuals, Richard knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all along, a life filled with meaning.